Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss annuities versus the 4% withdrawal rule, which is a better retirement strategy. So for this, we're going to use a case study. We're going to use Arnold. We're going to go through a situation and see which one makes the most sense for him. So when it comes to Arnold, he has $100,000 in cash. He has $3,300 a month in expenses. He has $2,700 coming in as Social Security. And then Arnold also has $2,300 in disability until he starts retirement at 65. And so then Arnold has to figure out what makes the most sense for him in his retirement as far as what to do with his money. And in this particular situation, Arnold is trying to decide whether or not he should take his $174,000 out of his 401k. So in this particular situation, Arnold was able to get a 7-year annuity at 4.8%. And that's what his return is going to be. And so Arnold wants to figure out if that's the best use of his money. And when you look at this particular situation, we really have to ask ourselves, what about the stock market? What about that 4% withdrawal rule as far as determining where is the best place to put our money? Now, for this particular situation, I'm actually going to lean on the 3-bucket strategy to come up with an approach that I believe will work for Arnold. And if it makes sense for you, you can add that to your own retirement strategy as well. And when you look at a 7-year annuity with a 4.8% return, that means that we're going to have $241,600 at the end of the annuity, at which point we have a couple of choices. One is we could obviously just annuitize it. We say, all right, I'm done. Let's go ahead and do this. Those are some of the options you have when you use a deferred annuity. And what that means is I'm going to put money inside of this annuity, but then it's not an immediate annuity where I place the money in and immediately it turns into an annuity, which means I get an income for the rest of my life. What happens is because it's deferred, I get to choose when the date is that I turn it into an income. If I want to do it at the end of this first 7 years, I can. If I want to go another 7 years, I can. If I want to go 3 years, another 1 year, I can do any of these because I get to choose when we're talking about a deferred annuity. Now, what I will say is most deferred annuities, you're normally going to wait 2 years before you actually receive your check, as far as when you annuitize it and then when it turns into a check. Your immediate annuity, that's immediate, right? As soon as you stick it in, they're going to start giving you the check the next month. But when you talk about a deferred annuity, they want a little bit of wiggle room. When I say they, I'm talking about the insurance company. And so a lot of times you'll see that they'll say, well, whenever you're ready to annuitize, you need to wait 2 years before you start receiving your check. Just something that you would want to consider. When you look at that, and we're basically going to say, all right, well, if you have about a 5% payout, I see about 4 to 6, sometimes 7% payouts, but the interest rates are going down, so we're not 100% sure. But let's go ahead and take the average. So we'll say we have a 5% payout. If you have $241,600, 5% of that would be $12,080 per year. So then you would say, all right, that's about $1,000 a month that I would be able to receive from this $241,000 that I annuitize. Now, before we move on to discussing the 4% rule, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of an annuity. So you have a guaranteed income for life. That's obviously the biggest pro of an annuity. That's what most people who are interested in an annuity are looking for. They want to be able to say, I have a check coming the rest of my life, just like if I had a pension. And I'll put a link to another video where I do go over some income annuity strategies. But for a lot of people, when you say, I want a guaranteed income for life, investing in the stock market, I can't guarantee. The word guarantee is a strong word. I can't guarantee a certain amount of money. But if you have an annuity, they will guarantee that amount, which means if they lose, then they're still going to give you the same amount. If they win big, they're still going to give you the same amount. And so there's no risk or management required. You give them the check, it's on the insurance company to figure out what to do with your money. And then you do have tax deferred growth until you withdraw, which is just a fancy way of saying that when you put the money inside of an annuity, you're not going to pay taxes on the growth every single year. Whatever happens, you're going to pay taxes when you start taking the money out of the annuity. Now, that does lead into some of the cons. So first and foremost, you have no inflation protection, which we discuss all the time because we don't want it to sneak up on us. For most people, you're going to be retired for multiple decades. Some of you are going to be retired for longer than you even work. And if you consider how much things go up in cost over time, if you look at the cost of a bag of chips or even a tank of gas, you know that the cost of things goes up a lot. And when you're looking at inflation, you're going to be dealing with about a 3% on average inflation increase every single year in retirement, which means that about every 20 years, that means that it costs twice as much money to purchase the exact same item. You also have limited flexibility when you put the money inside of an annuity. And so anytime that you have an emergency or you want to go into some of your funds, that option is not on the table. Once the money goes in the annuity, it's pretty much locked in there, which means that you ultimately are going to have to be strategic when it comes to what to do with your money. And that's why a lot of the times when I talk to people who use an annuity, I believe the three bucket withdrawal strategy is almost necessary because that's going to give you the flexibility that you need to deal with some of these emergencies and unforeseen events. It is very difficult to retire solely on an annuity. It's not impossible. It's just very difficult when you're talking about some of these unforeseen events and not having the access to the money that you would need. So when you look at the 4% rule, so if we took the same $174,000 that we are going to roll over from our 401k and you invest it in the stock market, and let's say you're able to get about a 8% return, right? The stock market averages a little bit around 7 to 10%, depending on kind of what's going on. So we're going to be on the lower end, and we're going to say we're going to get an 8% return on average. What that means is now in the 7 years that my money will grow to $298,000, which, as you already can tell, is about $50,000 more than what I had inside of my annuity because that was closer to a 5% return. So that 3% return each year ended up helping me generate an additional $50,000 for my retirement money. And then when you look at the 4% withdrawal strategy, that means that you're going to take out $11,920 and then you'll adjust it with inflation by 3%. Then what I'll do is if you're interested in having a conversation where we just talk about your retirement goal and your overall strategies, I'm going to put a link in the comments and in the description to where you can schedule a complimentary appointment with me. It's about 45 minutes. I'll answer as many questions as I can in the time that we have together. And I'm confident that I'll provide you immense value. Where one idea could easily make someone hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just like one warning could easily save someone hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all you have to do to be able to take advantage of that is just click on the link and schedule some time on the calendar, and then we'll have a discussion. And then I'll probably shoot you an email where there's some information that I'll need to get from you to make sure the time is most valuable. You don't want me asking you some silly questions where you could give me that information ahead of time, but it is complimentary. And if it's something you're interested in, I'm here for it. But you can see a couple things. First and foremost, you had a 5% payout when it came to the annuity. We have a 4% payout when it comes to the 4% withdrawal strategy. So in the early going, you're actually going to have a slightly lower income than if you just had the annuity in the beginning. But at the same time, you will also notice that if you do increase by that inflation every single year, you go up by the 3%, then you also know that you will pass that 5%. And at some point, you will actually be generating more monthly income from your investments, but your investments are still growing. When it comes to the pros and cons of the 4% rule, the pros are you have higher growth potential and we have the inflation adjusted withdrawals, as we just mentioned. You also have more flexibility to adjust your withdrawals based on your needs. Where if you needed a larger amount of money than the annual amount that you would receive from the 4% withdrawal strategy or your annuity, let's say there was a trip you wanted to go on, let's say you needed a surgery or you wanted to help a family member in some way, shape, or form, you have access to all of your money. That $300,000 that you generated, that is your money. You would pay the taxes on the withdrawal, and then you can spend the money how you see fit. So you have that extra flexibility when it comes to adjusting how much you need. Also, if you have a year where you're just like, you know what, Dre, I'm just kind of chilling this year. I don't really think I need that $12,000 to be added to my Social Security. I can just live off my Social Security by itself. Well, if that's the case, then we don't have to take the money out. You can just let your money continue growing. Now, the cons of the 4% rule is, of course, we're invested in the stock market. And the stock market, yes, long term has historically gone up, but no, it doesn't go up every single year. That there are fluctuations and there are times where we lose money. And if you're losing money in the stock market, that is what we call market risk, that your investments could go down. In your annuity, your monthly income can't go down. Another con of the 4% rule is it does require a little bit of active management and discipline when it comes to your investment strategy. Now, we're not saying that you should be out day trading or timing the market or anything like that. But what we are saying is even if you had to go in once a year or once a quarter and just rebalance your portfolio, and what I'll do is I'll put a link to another video where I go through some rebalancing strategies. That is definitely management that you don't have to do when it comes to an annuity. So that is something that you would have to consider whether you have any interest in looking at the stock market or whether you have to reach out to someone else to have them manage it for you and whether or not you're disciplined enough to follow the strategy. These are all things that we would need to consider when we're actively leaving our money in the stock market. When you look at it from a side-by-side comparison, You can see that the initial balance at 2032, inside of annuity, we're going to have $242,000. Inside of investments generating 8% return, we'd have $298,000. When it comes to our annual income, we're going to have $12,080 inside of the annuity. That's estimating about a 5% payout. And then if we use the 4% withdrawal strategy, we're going to have 11,920 because, as we mentioned, we're using 4% versus 5% as the annuity payout. Is there an inflation adjustment? Well, no, not traditionally in the annuity, but yes, you'd have it inside of the stock market investments. Is there market risk? Well, there's none in the annuity. The risk is on the insurance company to make that return. They're going to give you the $12,000 no matter what. But yes, in the 4% rule, you're invested in the stock market, that risk is on you. If you don't make enough money to cover your withdrawals, then you're slowly going to be consuming your principal. And depending on how long you estimate your retirement, that is something that could be very dangerous when it comes to running out of money. And then when it comes to flexibility, you don't have as much flexibility when it comes to putting your money in an annuity. Once it's in there, that's pretty much it. The insurance company has the money, and whatever the terms that you signed on the contract, that's what happens to that money. Whether or not it was designed just based on your life, or whether it was based on you and a spouse's life, or whether you're supposed to get paid a certain number of years, where it's a 10-year certain or 20-year certain, whatever the terms are, that's what's going to happen to the money. And you don't get to participate in the growth anymore. Where the insurance company is able to generate that 8% average, as we mentioned on the stock market, but then it's based off of that $241,000 and it doesn't go up ever again because you're locked into the annuity. Well, they're now able to continue growing the money. So let's say they had that 298,000 in 2032. Well, you retire and that's not that big of a deal. But in 2052, where they're still growing your money, but your payment is the exact same as it was 20 years ago, that is how insurance companies end up winning when it comes to annuities. And then the last part is the guaranteed income. So there is no guaranteed income in the 4% rule. That risk is on you. And yes, there is a guaranteed income when it comes to the annuity payout. But normally what I often say, and you guys hear me say it all the time, I'm big on flexibility, having all options on the table. And if you blend the two strategies, then we maybe can put something together where we can have an annuity, have some money that's left aside that we can invest, and we can reallocate our cash reserves in a way that is more efficient. So when it comes to the 3 bucket withdrawal strategy, normally the first thing that we're going to do is create our first bucket. And your first bucket is going to be 1 to 2 years of living expenses. Well, if I'm looking at $3,300 a month of living expenses, and then I multiply that by 24 to get the 2 years, that's $80,000. Where I can move $80,000 of cash now into my first bucket. And now one of the benefits is I already know what the amount is. So for example, in this situation, you see Arnold had $100,000 of cash set aside because Arnold wasn't sure what to do with the money, which is one of those things that I do think I run into a lot with people where we're saving because we know to save, but there is a point where we should stop saving, right? If we got 2 years of living expenses, I would say, okay, $80,000 is in cash. I would invest that in money market account so I can at least get more than the 0.0001% in your savings account, or maybe we can get a couple of percentage points because it does add up. Where I can invest in money market accounts and CDs, and now I can move that extra $20,000 into a different bucket because I don't need $100,000 sitting in cash. And I definitely don't need more than that sitting in cash because I'm just continuing to save in cash because I'm not sure what to do. So now we can say bucket number one is $80,000. That's going to be 2 years of living expenses. I can now move that $20,000 into the second bucket. In the second bucket, I could have a couple of options, but you could definitely put a portion of annuity inside of bucket number two. This is normally going to be investments that have a moderate amount of risk. It's normally going to be different bonds and treasuries where I'm probably keeping up with inflation, somewhere around that 3 to 5% in returns. But I feel relatively confident that I'm not going to lose my shirt on these investments. So if you put your annuity in there, that would be a bucket number two approach. So inside of my bucket number two, I can put $120,000 of that $241,000, and I can put that inside of an annuity that would generate $6,000 a year. Where now I'm sitting there and I've already covered all of my living expenses. Where I know my Social Security was about $2,700 a month, and that comes up to about $33,000 a year. I now added another $6,000 a year, so that puts me about $39,000, $40,000 a year, and that now gives me about $3,300 a month. I have already covered all of my living expenses from a partial annuity and Social Security. And so now, if I had that feeling that was like, man, I don't know if I want to put everything in the annuity, because I'm missing out on some of these growth. I'm missing out on some of these opportunities. They're only giving me 4.8%. Well, now we are able to say, all right, cool. I have my floor that no matter what goes on, I have my Social Security and I have my partial annuity, and now I'm going to build from there. So now we have our $80,000 sitting in bucket number one in our conservative fund. We have our bucket number two with our bonds and our annuity. And now we can put everything else in the bucket number three, which is where I would put the other $121,000 that's set aside. So I'm going to put that in bucket number three, where I'm investing in real estate and the stock market and a little bit more aggressively overall. But it's okay because I already have 2 years set aside in bucket number one. I already have my annuity and my bonds to make sure that all of my expenses are covered in bucket number two. And now it gives me the opportunity to focus on growth without having to risk my overall retirement. And one of the cool things about having all three buckets set up is now I don't have to be up at night worried about what the stock market is doing. I know that my living expenses are covered every single month when I wake up. And now I'm just focused on growth, and I can invest and allow myself to take advantage of some of that 8 to 10% that we see in the stock market. And then if there is a down year, I don't have to take any withdrawals out of that bucket, because bucket number three is designed for my investments that are 10 plus years out. Bucket number two is designed for that 3 to 8 years. So now when I need to, I can sell in the good times from bucket number three. I can move that into bucket number two. And then in the good times, I can sell from bucket number two, and I can move that into bucket number one to replenish my living expenses. But I have a 2-year runway. And there aren't many recessions that last 2 years. Now, I do agree that some of them do. But what we are saying is we've given ourselves a lot more wiggle room to make sure we don't run out of money in retirement. And so you can see here that you can expect to receive about $5,000 a year from that $121,000 following the 4% rule. And between those two, you have about the same $11,000 being generated every year, partially some from guaranteed income and partially some from flexible income, where if I have an emergency, I can go into that $120,000. And it doesn't mean that we can't keep contributing. If we're able to contribute $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month as we get closer to retirement, we're able to get rid of bills and debt. Maybe we could lower our living expenses. That's just more money that I have access to as far as my flexibility and what I want to do in retirement. On the other end, if I'm not that worried about my debt, I have very nice interest rates and everything's going peaches and cream. Well, then I can take that extra money, invest in the stock market so that my money is working for me so that I don't have to work for my money, which possibly gives you the ability to retire even earlier than you were originally expecting. And so ultimately, what makes the most sense for you is going to vary and be done on a case-by-case basis. But if you want guaranteed income and peace of mind, then you might lean on the annuity. If you're looking for a little bit more comfort with some risk and flexibility where you're a little concerned that you might be missing out on some of the growth of the stock market, then the 4% rule is pretty nice. If you don't have anything that's keeping up with inflation, then it may be worth considering the 4% rule, because we know that we have to keep up with inflation with some of our investments, that all of them can't be losing to inflation on a regular basis, because as the cost of everything else goes up and my money doesn't go up, well, then eventually my retirement is going to feel tight. I'm going to be running out of money, and that's not what any of us want in retirement. But often I find that a blended strategy gives people the best of both worlds. And the reason I say it that way is all investment instruments are just that. They're just instruments. There's like a toolbox with a bunch of options. And sometimes we can use a screwdriver, sometimes we use the hammer, and sometimes we use the saw. It just depends what we're trying to accomplish. And so when you are looking at the tools, if I want guaranteed income, I can pull the annuity lever. But if I want to keep up with inflation, I probably got to invest in the stock market, or at least something that's going to get me a return higher than 3%. There are different levers where there's pros and cons to everything. If I want my money to keep growing and I want to be able to control what happens to my money, then I need to invest in the stock market. I need to keep control of that. If I'm okay with my money going to the insurance company and then that's kind of it, then sure, go with the annuity, because you're going to have the peace of mind. You don't have to manage or reallocate anything. But oftentimes I find that the blended approach, where you take the best of each of these different approaches and you craft your own unique custom retirement plan, that normally works the best for most people. I'm always thankful for our time together. Thank you for watching this video. If you found value in it, I simply ask for you to like and subscribe so you can continue receiving valuable insights on how to create your own wealthy retirement system. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.